Hey guys, hope you all had a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year as we get ready to roll around into 2017. Graham and Chris back here with you again. Going to be a fiery show coming up today. We're going to start breaking down the Hall of Fame ballot candidates who are on. Ballots are due in today by all the Baseball Writers Association of America voters, and the Hall of Fame should be announced, I believe, in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I have to double-check the date on that, which I will do here in a moment. But going to be a fun one, and we're going to look mainly at the guys today who have been on for a while, and we'll slowly kind of move our way down into the guys who are going to be on their first year on the ballot, which clearly means guys like Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. And seeing as how even before the show we have already been fighting like crazy, it should be one hell of a show for you guys. So, Battle, before we decide to start tearing each other's heads off, how was your Christmas, my friend?
It was good. I had a good time. I went to a buddy's house, and we celebrated. We did more of a Yule thing than a Christmas thing, but we still had fun. And now it's December 31st as of this recording, and we're about to flip into 2017, and that means, more importantly than other things that may be coming up in the near future, 92 days, 20 hours, and 44 minutes from this moment, baseball will start again. Opening day, 92 days.
And let the countdown begin. And that date will be January 18th, so just a little over about 2.5 weeks to go before hopefully we get a couple more inductees into the Hall of Fame. So without any further ado, let's put the ball in play, and let me apologize to my dad now, who is probably going to call and give me more hate mail than any of you listeners out there can possibly do.
Meanwhile, he'll agree with me completely.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you're actually becoming the more favored son, and I'm just kind of, I'm just kind of the outcast. So, you should be firmly entrenched in the family before too long. But let's kind of get it going, and hopefully maybe we can start somewhere where we
let's do
both
the less
agree.
Controversial. Let's do the less controversial people. Let's start with a guy named Jeff Bagwell. I mean, Jeff Bagwell is entering into what I believe is his 7th year.
Yes, it'll be his 7th year on the ballot. And he was 71.6% of the ballot last year. And the preface, you need 75% to get in. So he's not too far away from seeing his face on a plaque up in Cooperstown, New York.
Right. And it's a plaque that he deserves to be on. We're talking about a guy who's a career .297 hitter, career on base of .408. Excuse me, hit 1,500 RBIs in his career, 449 home runs. The guy is a solid player. He's a former MVP, former Rookie of the Year, multiple-time All-Star, Golden Glover, Silver Slugger. I mean, the guy does it all. And I don't think that anybody can argue that he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame.
There have been some concerns. I'm surprised you bring that up because there have been some concerns with steroid use from Jeff Bagwell. And I see the grin because you and I have been kind of on flip sides on this. But big picture, no, I really can't disagree with you here. He's 22nd all time. He's 22nd all time in OPS, 948, which just shows you. I mean, just how productive he was at getting on base and what happened when he got in the box. This is the stat that really impresses me because everyone thinks of Jeff Bagwell as more of a power hitter, right? He wasn't. Biggio was the kind of the slap guy. He is the member of the 3,000 hit club. But I want you to hear those numbers and tell me what your first impression is. 1,401 walks, 1,558 strikeouts. So almost a 1-to-1 ratio for a guy who was one of the biggest power hitters, in Astros history. I mean, he was one of the staples of that Astros team. I was really surprised at the plate discipline that he had while still nearing 500 home runs in a career. I don't think we're going to see that because the game is evolving much more into either you're a contact or your power. You very rarely anymore see guys who have the ability to do both. Granted, he was a first baseman the majority of his career, a .993 fielding percentage. Granted, most guys are voted in because of their offense and not their defense. His numbers aren't at the same level as some of his counterparts in the Hall of Fame who played first base. But if you look at the era in which he played, it was obviously, an era where a lot of guys had a lot of power. He was very, kind of out of the box with the way that he stood. I've heard pitchers refer to him like a gopher coming out of a hole because he had that squat and then he kind of just popped up, and he had that big pad on the left-hand batting glove. But I can't disagree. I believe that he has certainly earned a plaque in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame.
Well, I'll say this for Jeff Bagwell and the steroid era issue that he's dealing with, or that he's been very strenuously linked to. I mean, it's definitely not a situation, a McGuire, Bonds, Clemens type situation where people are pointing fingers at him. He's going to, hearings in front of grand juries for, obstruction of justice. Nobody's making that major of a claim against him. But I'll say this for him. The guy played 15 years of baseball, and he declined exactly how you would expect to see a guy decline. He went about 9 years in and then steadily declined over the next 4 or 5 years. 2000 was his 9th year in baseball. That was the last time he hit over 300. And from there, you get a pretty steady decline, 288, 291, 278, 266, 250. So there's nothing, in my opinion, that stands out in his career as pointing directly to something that you could attribute to steroids. There's no major numbers that you could attribute directly to steroids. Now, I mean, if you really wanted to get picky, you could say that his 750 slugging and 1.201 OPS in 1994 is one of those numbers, but we're talking about a 26-year-old kid who's only 4 years in the league. You expect a guy 4 years in the league to increase his production that way. He did hit 368 that year. That was his MVP year, where he was an All-Star, an MVP, a Golden Glover, a Silver Slugger. He did it all that year. And he had that. Jeff Bagwell had a culture of achievement around him, but not the kind of achievement that you would attribute to performance-enhancing drugs. I think this was a raw talent. And
I will say, I believe number 3 or 4 on that list is another guy who we're going to get to here in just a couple of minutes that played for your hometown Giants team. Yeah,
we'll talk about that guy.
And I agree. I haven't seen anything in his career that really is vastly indicative. I mean, he was always kind of a stocky guy. His legs are always huge, but when you have that much body and you're going to crouch the way that he did, it really kind of it shrinks his strike zone, number one, because if you're attacking the baseball from that crouch, it's a lot harder for an umpire to expand that zone a whole hell of a lot. So it makes it a lot easier for you. You can work the ball a lot more into your wheelhouse than a lot of guys like Griffey who had that straight up posture. But we have seen his numbers.
We're talking about a guy who was a legitimate concern. This is a guy who got pitched around quite a bit. Yeah. There were seasons when he would take 20 and 25, 27 intentional walks because and we're not talking about a guy who was hitting 50 home runs. I mean, he never broke the 50 home run sort of barrier that other guys were doing in 93, 94, 95. Well, not so much 95. 95 didn't have a whole lot of baseball, but
27 is the highest number of intentional walks, but 155 intentional walks total, averaging roughly 12 intentional passes per season. So I'm with you. I don't really think that there's anything that points to him being, a cheater, if you will. But the writers haven't been the kindest to him. He started off in 2011. It was his first year of eligibility. Started off at only 41.7%, and he steadily climbed. He hit 56 the next year, 59.6 in 13. Then we saw him fall backwards. Actually slid back in 14 and 15 to 54 and 55% respectively. And then last year exploded up. I think maybe his voting percentage is taking steroids, but he went up from 55% to 71.5%. And from what you and I have been seeing, it's looking like a shoo-in that he's pretty much going to see enshrinement in 2017.
Yeah, the last time I checked, he was polling at over 90%. So obviously, I want to see Jeff Bagwell get into the Hall of Fame. I think Jeff Bagwell deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, along with a couple other guys on this list of top 6 guys.
Yeah, the second-ranked guy he's been on the ballot for a decade. He was playing at a time when, I was still pretty young. I think he retired before I was 10. And actually, it's ironically one of my school teachers, my 8th grade math teacher, I think knew him, when he was growing up, and that's Tim Raines from Sanford, Florida, not too far from where I live. I'm not sure if I think he might actually still live out here. It had a 23-year career. He quit playing, in 2002. So, I was 14 or 15 at that point. I didn't even realize he'd been playing that long. But, the prime of his career is a time when I wasn't really aware. And let's be fair, he was playing for the Expos, and no one really gave much to do about Montreal. But, when you look at what Tim Raines has done, it's tough because he's a guy whose numbers do not explode off the page at you. You don't see something on his statistical, chart and go, no doubt in my mind that guy should go into Cooperstown. But if you look at everything as a whole and you read the book from cover to cover, all of a sudden it's like, okay, if we look at this picture of not just what he did in the context of today, because that's where guys have to separate. It has to be in the context of what they did in their era. He's a solid player who, I think the longer he's been on, the more respect for what he did is kind of being afforded him by the writers.
Right. And when you and I were discussing these top 6 eligible inductees, possible inductees to the Hall of Fame, these top 6 guys on the ballot. And we looked at Tim Raines, and, we saw a 294 average. Obviously, that tanked a little bit his last year when he played for Florida. But we saw a 294 average, a very, 170 home runs. Guy only had 980 RBI. He walks 1,300 times in his career. There's nothing there. You look at those numbers and you're like, okay, he played baseball. He had 2,600 hits in 23 years. That's not a real high average number of hits per year. But then you kind of creep over here to stolen bases and you go, hey, wait a minute. Tim Raines stole 808 bases. He had a 1983 season where he stole 90 bases. He had a 1992 season where he's 32 years old. He stole 45 bases. This guy was a mover on in between the lines, on the base paths, and that not only does it qualify him for number 5 overall in career stolen base leaders, but in my opinion, when you got the number 5 guy career for stolen bases who was still doing it at, he was 36 before he dipped into 37 before he dipped into single digits. When you have a guy like that who steals bases that well, that consistently, I mean, 4 or 5 seasons above 70 stolen bases, one at 90. In my opinion, that's Hall of Fame worthy. That's a Hall of Fame career.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how, it's hard to disagree with the numbers. I mean, clearly, with the numbers that you're quoting. I think one of the things that you and I had discussed that really kind of piqued my interest was the fact that when you looked at his strikeout to walk ratio as well, he walked more times than he struck out. He walked 1,330 times, and then he struck out 966. So, 713 extra base hits, won a Silver Slugger in '86, a 7-time All-Star. Consecutively from '81 to '87. And as you said, and the big one there is that he is the fifth on the all-time record for stolen bases. Yeah, I mean, nothing. There is nothing that he does that makes me, really, man, this guy is, he's fantastic. But I don't know how with a body of work like that, and I'm hard pressed to think that if he hadn't played that final season in Miami or Florida, as they were in '02 as the Marlins, there's a good possibility that he's finishing up this career batting over 300. I mean, when you hit 191 in 98 games, I mean that's going to hurt you a pretty decent amount. So we could have seen a guy who hit over 300. And to be fair, his numbers were his slugging was horrific. It was 258, but his on base is still 351. Even in a year that rough, he walked 22 times, struck out 19. You kind of began to really see age get to him. But in '86, he was sixth in MVP voting, hit 334, 413 on base. I mean, it was really impressive. And you go back and look at some of his numbers, where he led the league. He led the league in on base in '86. He led the league in average in '86. He was first in runs scored in '83 and '87 and stolen bases. This is kind of pre-Ricky Henderson almost. From '81 to '84, so 4 consecutive seasons, he led in stolen bases, and then was second, third, fourth, sixth, third, seventh. And that's just from '81 to '92, and then obviously speed begins to take a hit. But yeah, I mean, you look at what he did in that era, in the late '70s, coming into the, played through the entire, played through 2 entire decades of Major League Baseball. I do believe that Tim Raines has, his longevity in the bigs, his longevity on the ballot. I believe as well. Will eventually, and I hope it's this year, will earn him enshrinement into the Hall of Fame. Now, guys, one thing we want to kind of preface here: we're not saying that all these guys should be getting in first ballot. Okay, we will try to kind of go ahead and, especially when we get down to the guys who are going to be on the first, and there's a bunch of new names coming on. But we're going to go more off guys just who we think deserves enshrinement. If you agree with us, great. If you disagree with us, even better. But let us know. Find us on Twitter at OOLeftField on Twitter. Also on Facebook, Out of Left Field, hosted by Chris and Graham. And join us on the Out of Left Field baseball community on there as well. Also, feel free to send us an email, ooleftfield@gmail.com. You can address it to Chris or myself, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We love, always want to hear what you guys are thinking, anything like that. So it always makes it fun, and, if you want to yell at us a little bit, even though I'm about to be yelling at Chris, and we're going to have a pretty spirited debate here in just a couple of minutes, but we always enjoy that coming from you guys as well. Also, a reminder, we're part of the Grueling Truth Network. Check them out, thegruelingtruth.net, for all your up-to-date information on NCAA basketball, the NCAA football playoffs, the college football playoffs, as well as final week 17 in the NFL, getting you prepped for the wild card and the divisional series. We head into Super Bowl time. It's just about a month away from Super Bowl 51. And again, that is all at thegruelingtruth.net and at gruelingtruth on Twitter, where legends speak. So, Bal, as we go ahead and make our move down, his second year on the ballot, and we brought this up a couple of weeks ago with Jeff Passan and Carl Rivich having a bit of a not a Twitter feud, but a pretty a pretty big discussion. It wasn't an all caps rage, okay? So they weren't yelling at each other, thankfully. But Jeff Passan saying very, very very succinctly, undoubtedly, that the only closer he was going to vote for was for Mariano Rivera, based mainly off of his postseason stats, and would not be slinging a vote out there for Trevor Hoffman. Now, Trevor Hoffman, a pretty much lifetime closer, held the Major League record for saves until Mariano Rivera said, "I'll take that, thank you very much," and snatched it out from under him at about a season or two after. But it's his second year on the ballot, had 67% of the vote last year, and I mean, I think he's making a very good case. And he's a guy that I think for the most part that you believe has earned a spot in New York.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, I think that Trevor Hoffman being the number 2 all-time saves record holder really makes him almost a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame at some point. Was it fair of certain members of the Baseball Writers Association to say that Mariano Rivera is going to get the only vote? No. You should have slung a vote out there for Trevor Hoffman. But I'm pretty confident that Trevor Hoffman is going to at least increase his voting percentage this year. He might not make it this year, but again, he's only in his second year, and he's might be the number 2 all-time saves leader, but he's still not necessarily a first ballot guy. So I understand why he didn't make it last year. Is he a second ballot guy? I think you could make an argument that, yeah, he is a second ballot guy. Especially with his 1,133 career strikeouts, compared to only 307 career walks.
And granted, this does go into a point that you and I have made multiple times, that we think one of the ways that the Hall of Fame ballot or the Hall of Fame induction needs to be changed is there needs to be more players permitted to be voted in. Because at the end of the day, the writers are still very selective of who they're going to vote in, but we have such a massive influx of players, the likes of which we have not seen in our lifetime. I mean, we have not seen this many guys. Vlad Guerrero, Mags Ordonez. You're going to have Edgar Martinez, Bonds, and Clemens. Maddox. Smoltz is going to. I mean, all these guys. Yeah, all these guys that have gone in or are preparing to enter their eligibility. They're still going to hold out. This idea that guys are first ballots and some don't deserve it the first ballot, and that's fine. That to you is more of an honor that you get in the first time compared to the second time. Whatever. That's your own personal issue as a writer. But I mean, there needs to be, in my opinion, 13 to 15 names allowed, because guys like Hoffman, or guys that probably deserved a longer look, didn't get enough votes to even stay on the ballot because there were so many names to go on that you can't sling enough votes out there for everybody to at least keep them on long enough to give them a fair enough shake to maybe make it into the Hall of Fame. So just I want to preface that off of what you're saying, because I agree his numbers, by and large, are relatively pedestrian. But 601 saves is pretty damn good.
Right. And an almost 4 strikeout to walk ratio.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is huge. In fact, the majority of his career, which he spent in San Diego, he was at or above 4. He was at 4.04. So, I mean, you're talking about a guy who has posted a career whip of 1.058, which is walks and hits per innings pitched for those of you out there who don't know what a whip is. And the lower that number is, the better, obviously. You want as few walks and hits per innings pitched as possible. But we're talking about a guy who had several seasons where he didn't even get to 1. A guy who was, a closer who was at 9.4 strikeouts per 9 inning pitched. I mean, the guy was a darn good closer. Now,
and to be fair, your point that the roughly 9.4 Ks per 9, that's 9th all time in history of baseball.
Right. And yes, we're talking about a guy who has posted a win-loss average of 61 and 75. But let's remember, we're not talking about a starter. We're talking about a closer. So what does that mean? It means he blew some saves, right? The guy blew, what did we find out? 76 saves.
Yep, 76.
In his career, which a lot of you guys are probably going, oh, no, he blew 76 saves? That's insane. Except that puts him at number 17 all time for blown saves. In 677 attempts, he shut 601. Now, let me talk to you about a guy who is in the Hall of Fame named Goose Gossage, who has 310 career saves and blew 112 of them. He is in the Hall of Fame. Raleigh Fingers, 341 saves, 109 blown saves. Another guy who's on the Hall of Fame. That's the mustache. Another guy who's on the Hall of Fame ballot this year, a guy named Lee Smith, 478 saves, which, by the way, is number 2 on the top 20 in blown saves.
And not to mention, I mean, Hoffman led the National League both in 98 and 06 in saves, 53 and 46 respectively. But now, Grant, okay, yeah, a huge career leads twice, but also came in second, I believe, 5 times. Okay, came in second 99, 2000, and 01 in a row, along with 05 and 97 before he won in 98. Also came in third a couple times. I mean, so, it's not like, I mean, if he wasn't leading in saves, yeah, you could guarantee that he was right there with everybody else, with who's going to end up, leading the league in that statistic. Now, yes, we have discussed, how important is it to have a specialist pitcher, and to be fun, oddly enough, Uguth Urbina in 99 is the guy who edged out Trevor Hoffman for the saves title. And I understand that we have debated how important is it to have a guy who comes in for 1 inning, faces 3 guys, hopefully 3 guys, and walks away. I think we want to see this eventually kind of move away, maybe back to how it used to be, where a guy comes in for 5 or 6 outs and locks everything down. But right now, again, while we were in this era, this time of baseball, the closer is looked upon in high regard. And if it's going to be looked upon in that high regard, you have to, at that point, be willing to say, okay, I may not think much of it now, but in the time in which he was playing, that was a big deal. He finished second in the Cy Young voting 2 times, in the top 10 4 times, and was a 7-time All-Star.
Well, and I don't think that anybody can look at a number like 53 saves in a single season and say that's not a big deal. Or his 162-game average or his average saves per season of 39. That's a big deal to anybody. I mean, he averaged 39 saves a season. That's insane. Even now, we look at guys who have 40, 41, 42 saves, and we're like, those are the top guys. So this guy averaged what the top guys are doing now. So, I think that if you're going to look at it in context of today's sport, which I think you should if you're a Baseball Writers Association writer now, you should look at it in context of what's going on today and is it great, and was it great when it happened? Both of those contexts should be taken into account. And yes, I think that in both contexts you can say that Trevor Hoffman was a great closer.
And I love that you bring up that kind of description, because that's going to lead us very very heavily into a conversation here in just a moment. Reminder, guys, at OO Left Field on Twitter, Out of Left Field hosted by Chris and Graham on Facebook as well. The YouTube channel, Out of Left Field, hosted by Chris and Graham. So we said we're going to bring you 6. We have done 3, and we believe that all 3 deserve enshrinement in the Hall of Fame, be it this ballot or future ballots, Jeff Bagwell, Tim Raines, and Trevor Hoffman. I really want to kind of be nice to the people and give them an argument and then a break and then another fight. So why don't we go ahead and do Roger Clemens? Because we got Curt Schilling and Barry Bonds left. And Barry Bonds is just going to be a knockdown, drag-out, bare-knuckle brawl. Like one of us might look like Ronda Rousey post-fight when all this gets done. Which, not to be a spoiler alert, but what I have seen going around on social media is that unfortunately after Ronda Rousey's horrendous defeat, that 2016 has claimed yet another celebrity life and career.
Ooh, ouch. Yeah, no.
Now, hang on.
Ronda Rousey got beat like a redheaded stepchild.
I am not going into I understand the interview that she had about thinking of ending her life. I am not at all trying to come anywhere close to that. I am strictly going off of
career.
Just in jest that her career is over. Nothing to do with that. So I want to caveat that before I get a massive amount of hate mail. That is not what I'm looking for. So all right. So let's get into
She
Roger
did get
Clemens.
beaten like a redheaded stepchild, though.
Let me again preface by saying, sorry, Dad. I know that you, after the surgery, he's doing well, but I'm sorry you have to listen to this. If you want to call Chris as your own, that's cool. It is what it is. But, one of us has to be right. One of us has to be wrong. Unfortunately, for Chris, it's going to continue to be him. So, Roger Clemens.
It is unfortunate to be right all the time. You're right. So let me ask you a question, Graham. Does Roger Clemens belong in the Hall of Fame?
Yes, he does. It pains me to say it, but yes, he does.
Well,
and I want to preface
what they say. If it hurts, you probably shouldn't do it.
Well, I mean, yeah, we could. Never mind. I'm going to leave this as a clean, family-friendly show. This whole debate really has become prefaced off of the fact that out of the Hall of Fame ballots that are due, several of them, quite a few, have been turned in early, kind of like an absentee early ballot type of deal. Roger Clemens, since he's been on the ballot in 2013, received 37.6, 35.4, 37.5, and 45.2% of the vote. There is now discussion, rumor, whatever you want to call it, that Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds are up nearly 70% ballot inclusion this year, which would be, like their career, a steroid-induced almost jump in statistical percentages. My issue here, this has been my issue I have long sat back and kind of thought that, they cheated, they did steroids, don't put him in. And unfortunately, as time has gone on, the way I have viewed things has become a little bit different. And, yeah, well, you know what? Even a broken clock's right twice a day, killer. So, at the end of the day, the Hall of Fame, I know you say it's not a museum. It is a museum. It is a building where the greats of the game go to be enshrined. Numbers
Apparently
be damned.
cheating.
In an era, as we have said on this show numerous times, to which you have agreed with me numerous times, in an era where Major League Baseball was baseball was dying, and to get it back, steroids came in full effect. It was happening before baseball died in the early 90s. I mean, let's not make any qualms that Jose Canseco and Mark McGwire were most likely already giving each other needles in the butt cheek in Oakland. Okay, but in the latter half of the 90s on into the early 2000s, steroids were a glaring part of the game. And it was on both sides of the ball, pitching and hitting. And you and I both have agreed that even before the steroid era began, Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, who we will get to, their numbers were worthy of enshrinement into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame.
They were indicative of players who would have been worthy for enshrinement in the Hall of Fame, yes.
So then, as I asked you before, and we kind of had our pre-show disagreement of me trying to not make you seem wrong in front of our listening audience, if their numbers were indicative before, if you say the 99 season, before they began using
98
PEDs.
98 for Curt Schilling, who I assume, I'm sorry, Roger Clemens, who I assume is who we're going to talk about right now.
Okay.
So if their numbers, I get what you're trying to get at. If their numbers were indicative prior to their suspected PED use, why do I think that they shouldn't be allowed in the Hall of Fame now?
Clemens, from 84 to 97.
Sure.
213 and 118. A 644 win-loss percentage, sub-3 ERA. He had, 41 shutouts, over 3,000 innings pitched, under 2,500 hits, so less than a hit per inning, just over 1,000 earned runs allowed, 203 home runs. So we're talking 14 seasons, 200 home runs, under 1,000 walks, 2,882 strikeouts. And you love talking about strikeout to walk, 3.12. Over an 8.5 strikeouts per 9 innings. That's before you say that is his, when he allegedly began using performance-enhancing drugs.
His suspicious period of time is a decade between 1997 and 2007.
Well, your suspicious period of time has been since you started on the show, Chris. You're killing me, Smalls.
So, why do I think he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame?
Because you're wrong.
Simple. It's because he cheated. Had Roger Clemens in 1997 not used steroids and just faded like a pitcher fades after 15 years in Major League Baseball, after a starting pitcher, after 15 years, it's going to start to fade. They're going to start to lose speed. They're going to start to lose movement. They're going to start to lose all those things, which all those things that steroids can help you avoid losing. Had he done that and just sort of gone a couple of more years doing that sort of natural fade and retired in 1999, maybe even 2000, after 17 years in Major League Baseball, he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. First on the ballot. Had he never done steroids, he would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer. Absolute, no doubt about it. He was basically Sandy Koufax between 1984 and 1996. 3 Cy Youngs, an AL MVP. But here's the problem. He didn't do that. What he did was he made a choice He made a choice that he knew could have consequences. And those consequences could cost him a place in the Hall of Fame. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say baseball turned a blind eye to it. Bud Selig turned a blind eye to it. Bud Selig doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame either. I'll just put that out there right now. That was a mistake. And it opened the doors for guys like Clemens and Bonds who don't belong in the Hall of Fame. But he made a decision, and he got caught. Now, I'm going to use an analogy that might make this a little bit easier to understand.
Are you authorized to use those?
I am. I'm an English major, so I can use metaphor, I can use analogy, I can use all kinds of colorful language. But if you're in college and everybody in your class cheats on a test, and you make the choice to cheat on a test, and the principal kind of just turns a blind eye to it, but the teacher doesn't, and the teacher catches you and maybe one or two other guys and fails you based on the rules set forth by the university. Now, whether the president of the university has decided that he's not going to make it his priority to make sure people aren't cheating or not, it's still against the rules of the university. You still will fail the test. You could possibly even be expelled from the university. You don't then say, well, I shouldn't fail because everybody else was cheating too. You might say that, but your logic is flawed. Because even though everyone else was cheating, you made a choice, you got caught, you have to live with the consequences. And
you are correct. You are correct.
In Roger Clemens' case, in Barry Bonds' case, the consequences are you chose to cheat, whether baseball turned a blind eye to it or not. It was still against the rules that were on the books. You chose to cheat. You got caught. You lost the Hall of Fame.
But the problem with the Hall of Fame, but the problem with that is what you are describing right now as far as rules being set forth. That's great. Okay, that part of it, sure, it is in the rules. You were not supposed to use steroids. Okay, but at that point, you are allowing subjectivity into this to determine, well, you cheated, but maybe you should do it. Maybe it's against my moral fiber that you use this, so I'm not going to allow you to go into the Hall of Fame, even though your numbers pre and post use of steroids were still indicative, were still the numbers of a player who would have been enshrined in the Hall of Fame.
There's no subjectivity. He objectively cheated. And objectively, that comes with consequences. And the objective consequences of cheating are loss of enshrinement in the Hall of Fame. That is an objective, logical line of thinking. There's no subjectivity. I'm not going to say.
But not every writer
say
he shouldn't be
this
inducted.
guy cheated. I'm not going to say this guy cheated, but he should be in the Hall of Fame because, and this guy cheated, but he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame because. Now, let's get one thing straight. Roger Clemens, not a nice guy. Okay? People don't like him. But that has nothing to do with whether or not he should be in the Hall of Fame. Absolutely nothing to do with it. Let me explain to you what does have something to do with it. Because in 2001, when he was 41 years old, he won 18 games. Or 20 games, 20 games. At the age of 38. He won 18 games at the age of 41 with the Astros. The only reason he did that, and the only reason he had that longevity is because he was cheating. So, you either get rid of the years that he cheated, 1997 to 2007, 1999 to 2007 for Barry Bonds, or you get rid of the player completely. Now, you can't just take the 10 years that he cheated and say, well, these don't count. Baseball's not going to do that. Fans aren't going to do that. Baseball Writers Association of America is not going to do that. You know that. I know that. So what do? You say, hey, I get it. You made a mistake. You made a choice. You did the wrong thing. So despite the fact that you were probably headed to Cooperstown anyway, because you made that choice, you're now going to be punished in accordance with the choice that you made.
Then where is the due process?
To be enshrined.
Then where is your due process? Because at the end of this, there's no proof. At the end of this, there's no proof of this. Now, granted, I'm playing devil's advocate because I'm along with you. I believe they both used. But there's no proof. So, Chris, if as an English major, okay, you write some fantastic book, which you're a published author, okay? Well, you are a published author. Okay, what is your book?
It's called 3 Days in Diyala.
Okay, a military book about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, so if while you are working on a paper for school and someone believes that you plagiarized something, are you expelled at that point? Hey, you know what? I'm looking at this. This is awfully familiar. This is awfully indicative. It looks to me like you plagiarized this. This wasn't your work. You're gone.
There would be an investigation.
And how much proof? And how much proof do you need to have before you're going to be expelled, removed, whatever?
It would need to be somewhat conclusive. You would need to at least be able to show one case where I had, say, 25 or 30% in common with another published piece or another piece of writing that had been turned in.
So what if? Okay, so let's say
So when Barry Bonds failed drug tests in 2000 and 2001 and again in 2003, is that not somewhat conclusive evidence that he was probably juicing?
Sure.
When Roger Clemens failed drug tests on 2 or 3 occasions, is that not somewhat conclusive evidence that he was juicing?
He probably, yes. I mean, depending on what the testing was for testing
just because a ball player says that he didn't knowingly use performance-enhancing drugs, as was Barry Bonds' 2003 argument, that he never knowingly used human growth hormone or THG.
Were those supposed to be air quotes, or that little bunny foo-foo hopping through the forest?
Well, I only had one hand available. You're watching me a little too closely. When he failed 3 drug tests and then said he never knowingly used performance-enhancing drugs, that was a baseball player who was still in the middle of an active career trying to put out a fire. However, as logical creatures who can look at a series of events and say, he failed 3 drug tests, he was probably using. We can look at those 3 failed drug tests and say, Barry Bonds used steroids. That is conclusive to me. Now, he may never have been convicted of using steroids. He may never have been suspended for using steroids, but he failed the drug test, positive for performance-enhancing drugs, and in my opinion, that's conclusive evidence.
And it's funny how when that happens, yet nothing was done by baseball until the tail end of a failed commissioner's tenure.
Exactly. And that is exactly why I said that Bud Selig does not belong in the Hall of Fame, because when you allow Bud Selig, who turned a blind eye to blatant cheating in Major League Baseball, and you allow him in the Hall of Fame, then you almost have to let these guys in, right? You almost have to say, well, Bud let him do it, and he's in the Hall of Fame, so they did it. They might as well be in the Hall of Fame.
And I get that,
but when we're looking
at these numbers, pre and post steroid
It
accusations.
doesn't matter.
It does
they
matter.
made the choice to cheat.
That's fine, but
They
still
were
had
having
the
Hall
numbers
of Fame
before.
for,
That's
they were
fine,
having
but
Hall of
they
Fame
made the
careers,
choice
and they
before those
still
numbers,
made
and
the
it was
choice
still good
to
enough.
cheat.
But they still had numbers before that choice good enough and after. Put them
But
in the
you can't
hall.
separate.
Let people make a choice of what they think.
You can't separate the two. You can't separate pre and post in the Hall of Fame. You're
Why
either
don't you
in
just
the Hall of
completely
Fame
forget the
or you're not
1990s and the
in the Hall
early
of Fame.
2000s?
You can't. They happen.
Then
And
why
the people
even
who got
think
caught,
about
people who got
think
caught
about
doing
baseball from 1990 to 2005? Why
people who got
even
cheating-
think about baseball in that 15-year period?
the people who got caught cheating made a choice. They knew what the consequences of that choice was. They made the choice anyway. They got caught, and now they are being punished for it. And that
Yes.
punishment is not being
but
enshrined in the Hall of Fame.
I get that,
Doesn't
but they made
matter what.
But they
you
made
did.
a choice that was basically tacitly blessed by
Doesn't
Major League
matter.
Baseball.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You had a cheating commissioner who allowed cheating in baseball. It doesn't matter. Because when you're talking about, remember when I said you have to look at things in perspective of both eras, both then and now, right?
Right.
You can't ignore one or the other. So if they were going to be inducted in 2003 or 2001 or 2000, they would go in, steroid use or not, because it was tacitly allowed at the time in the era that it existed. However, it is now 2016, and you can't ignore the current climate of baseball when you're voting for people to go in the Hall of Fame. And the current climate of baseball says that if you cheat, you don't get enshrined. If you cheated, you are not worthy of enshrinement. That is the current climate of baseball.
But who set that climate, Chris? Who set that climate?
The fans.
That climate was set by a crap commissioner who wanted to clean up a game that he allowed to get sullied and dirty, and then wants to go out looking as good as he can, and is now going to go into the Hall of Fame while still leaving those guys who he allowed to do that and didn't care that they were doing it, leave them out to be completely scapegoated by the fans. That's what's happening here.
That climate was set by the fans when they found out about the steroid usage. Had the fans known in 1996 that steroids were rampant, even though it should have been blatantly obvious, had failed drug tests been put out for people like Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and Sammy Sosa in 1996, 1997, 1998 when they were going through the home run race, had that happened then, it would have blown up. Everybody would have stopped watching baseball.
But they weren't for a very specific reason. They weren't for a very specific reason.
Because baseball was dying because of the strike. We all know that. However, I said,
so you want the
can't ignore the current climate of baseball, and the fans set the climate. And what the fans say is,
that's fine. But if that's the case, then keep a guy like Ryan Braun out who did steroids in this era. But don't ignore an era. No, don't ignore an era where it was allowed and it was accepted, and then keep guys out because now you don't like what they did when you loved the fact that Sosa and McGwire and Bonds were chasing those records and hitting those home runs, and you tuned in every night to see if they would actually break the damn record.
Yeah, we watched it because we thought they were doing it on their own. We thought that these were guys who were actually making history. Turns out they weren't. Turns out they weren't doing anything great. They weren't making any history. Barry Bonds didn't make history. Barry Bonds doesn't lead the home run record.
According to Major League Baseball, he does.
He cheated. Sammy Sosa cheated. Mark McGwire cheated. Barry Bonds cheated. Roger Clemens cheated.
And it was allowed. It was welcomed. It was welcomed.
But now that everybody knows what happened, you can objectively go back and look at it and say, shouldn't have been done. And that doesn't just go for players. It goes for Roger Clemens too. Or it goes for Bud Selig too. However, nobody, either in the Baseball Writers Association of America or the fans, have anything to do with whether or not Bud Selig goes into the Hall of Fame. That went above our heads. So,
so basically you and I are split.
People,
so you and I are split.
who are being left out in the cold by Bud Selig are being also left out in the cold by the small group of people, 5 or 6 guys, who went into a room and decided that Bud Selig deserved a place in the Hall of Fame. Decided incorrectly that Bud Selig deserved a place in the Hall of Fame.
Okay, so at worst, you and I mildly disagree on this.
Yes, mildly, somewhat.
So,
but I will say this.
I will say this. At this point,
you will lose a huge percentage of fans and their trust in the Hall of Fame if you put Bonds and Clemens in. You will.
I think it depends on how people view the Hall of Fame. If you view the Hall of Fame as this, shrine of, perfect baseball specimens, then maybe. But if you look at it as a museum of what the game was, and is supposed to be, and you can watch how the game has progressed, then that's what it is.
Okay, fine. So then it's very simple. It's very simple. And I know you call this dramatic, but it's very simple. If you're just going to look at the Baseball Hall of Fame as a museum that depicts what baseball was, what baseball is, and what baseball is going to be, then you get rid of the Baseball Writers Association's voting, you stop inducting members into the Hall of Fame, and then 7 years after a guy retires, you put his name in the Hall of Fame on a little plaque, and it's a participation trophy.
No, because playing in baseball is not indicative that you go into Cooperstown.
It is if everybody gets in. If
no,
you
but
let
come on,
the guys
cheated,
if you let the guys who cheated the game into
regardless of what they have done, regardless of what you say that they have done, that what they did in the game was monumental. Whether it be legitimate, all them or not, it was monumental change in the game. How in the hell do you want to leave that much history of baseball, be it dark history or not, out of the game?
Then you have to mark it as such. You can't just enshrine these guys and pretend like they didn't do anything.
Why do you think I have been on the record saying that if you're going to do that, say that the steroid era is from 1990 to 03 or 04?
But they won't.
Okay, but
that's the so while if you want to operate in a fantasy land where you can put asterisks on plaques, fine. Then Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens should be in the Hall of Fame. But if we're going to operate within the realm of reality where that is never going to happen, then you have to keep them out. Because if you don't, then 100 years from now, people are going to look at those plaques and say, those guys were great. Those guys were equivalents to Babe Ruth. And
should Rafael Palmeiro be in the Hall of Fame?
Probably not.
But would you consider him? He's not a jerk. Bonds and Clemens are jerks. They are easy to hate. They are the black-hearted guys who are easy to hate, who cheated the game, and that's why it is so easy for people to say keep him out.
Sammy Sosa's not a jerk. Sammy Sosa's a really nice guy. I don't like him. I don't want him in the Hall of Fame because he cheated. Rafael Palmeiro is a very nice guy, but he cheated. You know who else is a nice guy?
Curt Schilling? Not really.
Not really, no. I don't think a lot of people like Curt Schilling.
They don't. He got fired from ESPN.
He did.
I love his analysis.
From everything that I've ever read,
Curt Schilling is the next name on the list.
From everything I've ever read, Shoeless Joe Jackson was a very nice guy. People loved him.
I know. I mean, Ray Liotta was great.
Ray Liotta was great.
I heard if you build, I heard when people built stuff that he would come.
But he was kept out of the Hall of Fame because he cheated.
Supposedly, he is the one person who is thought of to have not thrown that series.
But
and the numbers go to show that he did not throw that series.
But he was tainted by the rest of the team. Did throw the series. He was convicted of cheating, kicked out of baseball, and kept out of the Hall of Fame.
And
Pete Rose, people don't like Pete Rose. But if you're going to put Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens in the Hall of Fame, you have to put Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame.
No, because you can't.
He is still the all-time hits leader in Major League Baseball.
And right now, you have Barry Bonds, who is still the all-time home run leader.
Okay, so if you're going to let cheaters in, you got to let Pete Rose in.
But you're saying that Pete Rose bet on the game, not cheated.
Betting on the game is cheating. He broke the rules.
Yes,
he bet
I understand.
Against himself.
And that's where everything begins, because now you are changing the outcome of game. He had his thumb on the game between that. As a hitter, he's one person. As a manager, and if you're betting against your own team and you can completely influence the outcome of the game, hell no, you shouldn't be in.
Exactly.
That's the cardinal sin. And that's been known for centuries.
Are going to use a performance-enhancing drug that you know is going to give you numbers that are astronomical? No, you shouldn't be in.
When everybody else and their mother is doing it and baseball is clearly okay with it, yes.
Doesn't matter.
It does matter.
It doesn't matter. They cheated.
Rock. Yes.
They cheated.
All right, so moving on from Roger Clemens, Curt Schilling's also up for the Hall of Fame there, buddy. I think he might be a little bit less dramatic, seeing as how Barry Bonds, we can get to hopefully a little bit briefly.
Well, we really already talked about Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds doesn't deserve the Hall of Fame. He can go off into baseball obscurity for all I care.
Barry Bonds is one of 4 members of the 40-40 club and in the 400-400 club.
Yes.
And
had he left it at that and allowed his career to proceed at that pace, he'd be a shoo-in, first ballot kind of guy. Except that he didn't. He cheated. So, moving on.
To me, it is still up to the fans to make their own decision.
He played 12 years of baseball in which he hit 400 home runs. In the next 7 years, he hit 350 home runs based on his use of steroids.
Vitamins.
Yeah, vitamins called creatine, HGH, and THG. Anyway.
So Curt Schilling. All right, longtime pitcher for Phillies, pitched for the Diamondbacks for a little bit. The Boston Red Sox, obviously. Red Sox probably what's that?
Pitched for the Diamondbacks in their World Series year.
Yep, and then probably his most notable game is going to be the Sox in 2004 in the ALCS, Game 6. Finishes a career 216 and 146, little under a 3.5 ERA, 3.46, but a 1.137 WHIP, really impressive there. Averaged just over 4 strikeouts per walk. Walked 711, but struck out 3,116. Schilling was kind of the best way I can kind of describe him is more. He was kind of a computer. He's really a techie guy anyway. But one of the things I remember I had read about him is that he had a computer program that showed every pitch he had ever thrown to every batter he ever faced. And he could go back and look at sequences. He could look at what worked, what didn't, where the ball was hit to when he threw this pitch and what location. He was a very cerebral pitcher. I don't know how many of those you see nowadays. I think Greg Maddux is one I can think of. But I mean, the guy was in for 20 years, from 88 to 2007. Pitched from he was 21 till he was 40. Retired in Boston after playing 4 seasons there. Played 4 seasons in Arizona, and then was in or 3.5 in Arizona, and was in. I didn't know this actually, but was originally started with the Baltimore Orioles. Right. Had a cup of coffee in Houston, and then came in '92 to the Phillies, and was with the Phillies for the majority of his career.
He didn't do much more than have a cup of coffee in Baltimore either.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he was there for 3 separate seasons, but that was also a total of 44 games. So yeah, and then played 56 games in Houston before. So it looked like more, and he was used more as a reliever early on in his career. He was a closer. He had a total of he had 22 saves actually in his career. So
almost half of which came at the end of his career when he was in Boston.
Yep. He had 9 in 2005, and then had 13 between the years of 1990 and 1992. So, numbers are relatively pedestrian. I mean, nothing really, again, jumps off the page at you. But he's a guy who...
Except that 3,116 strikeouts to 711 walks.
Exactly. And that's really, to me, the one that I see that. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize...
And by the way, over a 20-year career, he only issued 43 intentional passes.
Right. Which, I mean, to me,
of course,
that's
he
not
hit,
as...
He hit 52 guys, too, so...
So it's intentional. So no.
In Kurt Schilling, it might have been intentional.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the intentional walks from a pitcher isn't as big of a stat. I think it shows more for a hitter as to what is thought of that hitter. He's 49th all-time in WHIP at a 1.137, like we said, which is pretty impressive. 15th all-time, though, in strikeouts, and led the NL rather, in strikeouts in 97 and 98 with 319 and then an even 300 respectively. Started 436 games. Which is that's really impressive. You're talking about strikeouts per 9, 25th all time in strikeouts per 9 with 8.6 strikeouts per game. For 9 innings pitched, which is really impressive. I mean, he was not a guy who you thought of really as a power pitcher, guy who could overpower you and get the ball past you, but I think that kind of shows to the cerebralness that he had. And then strikeouts per walk, you said was a 4.383. Mm-hmm. That's third all time.
Right.
So, a lot of his numbers, you kind of have to go beyond just what's there. And that kind of goes into more with sabermetrics. It's also what I think really helps Tim Raines is the inclusion of sabermetrics now. It gives you a much wider look as to what he did beyond just what the original numbers that you're used to seeing shows. A gutsy performance. Right. He's already in the Hall as a pitcher from 2004, but I think you could make a pretty fair case for Schilling to find himself eventually on a plaque in Cooperstown, New York.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you looked at the sort of traditional numbers of Curt Schilling, he was never really, really impressive. I mean, he was always hovering right around a 3.5 ERA. At times he shot up as high as 5, but his average is about 3.5. 3.46, I think, is his total 20-year average. So not spectacular. Never won a Cy Young. Never won an MVP. In fact, only finished top 10 in the MVP voting at number 10 twice.
Did finish second in the Cy Young 3 times, though. In back-to-back years. In 2001 and 2002 with Arizona, finished second. Also finished second in 2004 with the Red Sox, and then fourth in 97 with the Phils.
Both World Series years for him.
Correct. Yep.
2001 and 2004. And he was a 6-time All-Star, which is, in a 20-year career, is pretty pedestrian of a good pitcher. Or of a good player at all. But there were years in his career where he wasn't even considered for a single award. And so I think if you look at the sort of typical stats that he brought to the game, then you could look at him and say, yeah, he was a pretty pedestrian pitcher. But when you look at a guy who, in his final year of baseball, in 2007, when he was back in Boston, or when he was in Boston, excuse me, in 2007, his final year of baseball, and he starts 24 games, goes 9-8 with a 3.87 ERA. Just not a good year for him. Still maintaining a WAR of 4. Roughly averaging a WAR somewhere right around 6 in his career. Had years where he went as high as 9 or 8.7. Those are his 2 back-to-back second place finishes for the Cy Young, 8.8 and 8.7. I mean, the guy won games, and that's what looking at beyond the traditional metrics will show you, is that he was a successful pitcher.
Right.
And
not even that. I mean, the beauty of the Hall of Fame voting is that it goes, unlike Cy Young and yearly awards, we can go beyond the regular season to the postseason, where he was 11-2 in 12 series, an .846 winning percentage with a 2.23 ERA. I mean, when you put him in a situation in the playoffs where he needed to perform, he did. 133 and a third innings pitched in the playoffs, gave up 104 hits, 33 earned runs, 12 dingers, but he struck out 120 and only walked 25. I mean,
right,
it's nuts. And he won the MVP in 01, or the co-MVP, but he shared it with Rainey Johnson, and then also won a ring in 01, 04, and then went out a champion in 07 with the second title in Boston Red Sox in the last 90 whatever years until they won it in 11 or 12.
Right, and when you look at those postseason numbers, at his postseason pitching, it's indicative of a guy who we all assume is going to be a Hall of Famer when he retires, possibly even a first ballot guy. And because when you look at his numbers, he looks a lot like Madison Bumgarner. I mean, low ERAs, high winning percentages, lots of strikeouts, lots of innings pitched, deep into games. I mean, unless you can somehow show me where he stumbles, I don't see what keeps him out of the Hall of Fame. Maybe not this year. I don't know that he's a first ballot guy. I don't know that Madison Bumgarner is going to be a first ballot guy unless he can really pick up his regular season performances. But he's 5 years on the ballot this year. I can't imagine he's going to go more than 7.
Now, I'd be surprised if he went more than 7 years, but something that you and I were just discussing on our last big debate is guys just kind of shooting their mouth off saying things that make no sense or just really ludicrous. And some of the things that he has been putting out there on social media has cost him his job. I mean, if you're coming into, as we've said, it is subjective. It's guys, it's writers, men, women voting on who they think is Hall of Fame worthy. With the climate changing in the world today, it could potentially leave him out in the cold a lot longer than I think either you or I think he should be left out there just off of numbers alone.
Right. And, I think that really speaks to, what he's been kind of spouting off in the media, especially on social media lately. It's outright racist. It's outright homophobic. It's outright transphobic. And those are the kind of things that you're dealing with people in the Baseball Writers Association of America who are going to sit in all of those categories. These are going to be guys who are members of the LGBTQ community, who are a diverse races and ethnic origins and religions. And, he sort of takes the Breitbart hardline. I won't go so far as to call him alt-right, because alt-right is really just a euphemism for neo-Nazi. But he compares, people who practice Islam to Nazis, and then he backs off of it and says, "Well, I'm talking about the radicalized ones." And then he says things like, he said some terrible things on Facebook that I don't really want to repeat about the transgender community. And then he calls Stephen A. Smith. He calls Stephen A. Smith the biggest racist at ESPN because Stephen A. Smith stands up for something that he believes in and what Colin Kaepernick was doing, and also for the fact that pointing out the fact that yes, there is still racism in sports and that it's not just gone. But he calls Stephen A. Smith a racist. So he says some things that are hard to back off of. And, yeah,
Right.
if you put it in the context of the Hall of Fame, there are a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame who are racist. But, and it might sound like a cop-out, but those guys are products of their eras. When you grew up in the teens, and the 20s, and the 30s.
Yeah, I mean, things were definitely different. And I think, I hope that it doesn't leave him out of the Hall of Fame, but if he continues on this trend, I can understand why it would. Right. And I certainly couldn't. It sounds kind of odd that, I'm okay with someone not being in the Hall of Fame because of something they're saying, but I don't mind that they juiced. But I mean, let's not be foolish here in the idea that there probably is, a homosexual baseball player who is not outed. I mean, it's just the climate of sports that we're in today. It's a good possibility that it is. And those kinds of comments with the way that things are changing, whether or not you agree with the lifestyle or not, and we're not preaching religion here. This is just a baseball show. That's well beyond my pay grade. But I hope that he slowly kind of takes a step or two, back and understands that just because it's okay to disagree with what somebody is doing or what somebody is, or the choices that they make, without having to completely insult who they are as a person or as a group or as a religion, because you can't lump everybody into one generalization, or otherwise you are becoming the people that you are trying to say that they are. You're just as bad. So, so after our philosophical discussion right there, and a heated debate where I think we need you out there to tell us who was right and who was wrong. If you agree with Chris, if you agree with me, hopefully more of you guys agree with me, because if you don't, I'm not going to hear the end of it. Chris already thinks that he's number one because his name comes first on the show. He just says alphabetical, but I think it's a little bit more, I think he's got a little bit more ego thing going on here. But again, please tweet us at OO Left Field on Twitter. You can send us all the emails you want, ooleftfield@gmail.com. And of course, you can leave you can leave messages on the Out of Left Field Facebook page, Out of Left Field, hosted by Graham and Chris, and on the Out of Left Field baseball community.
Chances are there's going to be a poll up at the Out of Left Field baseball community later today.
Yes, and we will share that around. And you guys are welcome to please vote on it, leave your comments. Let Chris know that you have my back. As we go into a new year, let's keep some of the good things going, which is Chris being wrong and me being right. Or
be honest with yourself and let Graham know that he's flat out wrong, and we'll go from there.
A little bit the flattest I've been in years since we were in the Army, big fella. But all that being said, guys, we did not get to anything with the conclusion of the AL West. That's mainly because we had the first six of the Hall of Fame candidates, and that was clearly a pretty big debate. We will be moving much more swiftly along the line as we kind of move into the new year. But Battle, the beauty of this show, it is the final show of our inaugural 2016 year. I really said that was kind of last week's, which I guess the point it is. This is our last recording you and I are going to do this year. It's obviously going to kick off tomorrow. So Happy New Year to everybody. Hope that you all are enjoying listening. I probably should have prefaced
this is going to be the first show of our 2017 year.
Exactly. And I probably should have said this before, but if you're hungover and you got a headache, you might want to not listen to this show right now, but if you've gotten to this point, my bad. It is what it is. So, guys, have a great, Happy New Year, a safe New Year. If you're still partying tomorrow, please don't drink and drive. Have someone to drive you. Be safe, be smart, and have a great New Year's Eve for those of you, for you and I, Battle, and everyone have a great New Year. We'll see you guys next week back on Out of Left Field.